I'm sure you're also aware of the lack of both religious freedoms and the rights and lack of rights of women in Saudi Arabia. In your opinion, is Saudi Arabia a human rights violator?
Saudi Arabia certainly does not share the same values of America. However, American interests have been advocating in Saudi Arabia for some time. And I think the question is, what is the pace of progress that should be expected for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to advance rights to women and others in the country?
But as it currently stands, do you consider what they're doing to be human rights violations?
I would need to have greater information, Senator, in order to make a true determination of that.
You're not familiar with the state of affairs for people in Saudi Arabia, what life is like for women? They can't drive. We've
Yes.
had people jailed and lashed. You are familiar with all of that?
Yes, Senator, I'm familiar with all of that. And
So what more information would you need?
in terms of when you designate someone or label someone, the question is that the most effective way to have progress continue to be made in Saudi Arabia or any other country? So my interest is the same as yours. Our interests are not different, Senator, and there seems to be some misunderstanding that somehow I see the world through a different lens, and I do not. I share all the same values that you share and want the same things for people the world over in terms of freedom. But I'm also clear-eyed and realistic about dealing in cultures. These are centuries-long cultures, cultural differences. It doesn't mean that we can't affect them and affect them to change. And in fact, over the many, many years that I've been traveling to the kingdom, while the pace has been slow, slower than any of us wish, there is a change underway in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. How and if they ever arrive to the same value system we have, I can't predict that. But what I do believe is it is moving in the direction that we want it to move.
And at a time when we need more allies than ever, we seem to be applying a standard now that unless you're a perfect nation, we're going to take you publicly out and humiliate you with reports we put out about what you're doing here on these rights for this minority or some other group. Now, don't get me wrong, we should speak quite adequately about what we stand for. And Rotary Club, that was built on the idea that you would not have racial lines, and by the 1920s that you would have women as members and all these kind of things. Rotary Club is an example of where you can have these kind of civil societies and all. We should be very proud of who we are, but it doesn't mean we go to a country and say, if you're not where we're at, or if you're not where Great Britain is 800 years after the Magna Carta, we're not going to stand with you. When your neighbor's house is on fire, FDR said, you loan him your hose. You don't get into a long discussion about whether or not women should have the right to drive in the streets of Saudi Arabia. But you need a little more sophisticated understanding. And if you walk a mile in their shoes, you realize not everybody over there is bad. The only reformist tendencies there are right here in the monarchies. That's the only reformist tendencies we have over there.
Mainly those extremist, Islamist, Wahhabi groups that's been fighting the rest of the society. But
ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce the United States Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Secretary Tillerson is no stranger to the chamber. His company, ExxonMobil, has been a member of this organization for as long as I think they existed and we existed, and they have been extraordinary supporters of our work here and around the world. Secretary Tillerson, of course, is no stranger to Saudi Arabia. In fact, few, if any, of his predecessors have had such deep working knowledge of the Mideast, and particularly from the business perspective. He is a man who has demonstrated all of his skills in recent days and weeks, taking over the State Department and trying to take on the nation's challenges around the world while building a staff and becoming acquainted with the government side of this town. We, all of us in this organization, look forward to working closely with him and the administration to advance the issues we've been discussing, the critical bilateral relationships between Saudi Arabia and the United States and the effect that will bring us in the Middle East and around the world.
Well, thanks so much, Tom, and good afternoon to all of you. And Tom and I are old friends many years back, and I want to particularly extend a warm welcome to His Royal Highness, Prince Saud Al Faisal, to His Excellency, Dr. Kasabi, to Ambassador al-Assad, and to Vice Chairman Khalid al-Saif. Thank all of you for your commitment to this very strong partnership between our two countries. I'm pleased to be here today to reaffirm the very strong partnership that exists between the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We have a long relationship with Saudi Arabia that extends over 80 years, and our support for a strong and steady partner on economic cooperation remains as firm as ever. As many of you know, we had a very successful visit last month with Saudi Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and his delegation. During the course of these meetings, President Trump and members of his cabinet agreed the U.S.-Saudi partnership should be taken to new heights. Those meetings and numerous others since show how the renewed depth and strength of our relationship is growing. As for me, I've already had many opportunities to meet with Foreign Minister al-Jubeir as we work together with Saudi Arabia on some of the most vexing problems confronting Middle East security and stability. We are very encouraged to find in the Saudi leadership a strong and steady partner on these issues, as well as on the economic cooperation. We support Saudi Arabia's 2030 plan that seeks to transform their economy and society, in particular specific commitments to increase foreign ownership on listed companies, to boost the women's workforce participation rate from 22% to 30%, to augment the private sector's contribution to GDP from 40% to 65%, to move to free market pricing in place of subsidies in energy, to raise the share of non-oil exports from 16% to 50% of non-oil GDP, and to increase dramatically the capacity and quality of the health and education sectors through substantial capital investment. We encourage these kinds of reforms globally, and we certainly applaud Saudi Arabia's leadership in pursuing this vision and economic progress for the region. This administration is committed to using its good offices to help facilitate partnerships between American businesses and Saudi Arabia. The Saudi government and Saudi businesses can be confident they are working with companies that abide by the highest anti-corruption standards and laws in the world. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 program seeks to transform its public investment fund into a sovereign wealth fund with holdings of hundreds of billions of dollars. We understand that the government will aim to hold 50% of its non-Aramco assets abroad compared to the 95% of the PIF's funds that are currently invested in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia will find many promising investment opportunities in the United States, and that will become more apparent as you further engage with our companies later today. And all of you assembled today, here and in the Kingdom, have a friend in the U.S. government to assist you in fostering mutually beneficial economic collaboration, for helping to initiate a successful new chapter in our important and enduring relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Well, welcome, Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Kingdom's delegation. Welcome to the Pentagon. Mindful of our legacy, our relations that between our two nations go back to when your King and our President met on board a U.S. cruiser in Bitter Lake in 1945, and certainly it will not end with us here over many, many years, 70-odd years now, has been the basis for indispensable economic and security partnership together. And our military-to-military relationship remains steady and consistent. And I appreciate your vigorous leadership, Your Royal Highness, your political commitment, and your willingness to broaden and deepen the Kingdom's support for our common effort. But again, welcome to you and your delegation.
Mainly those extremist, Islamist, Wahhabi groups that's been fighting the rest of the society.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for making us feel welcome today at the Pentagon. Today we are facing a very serious danger in the region and in the world, either when it comes to the hostile activities of the Iranian regime that is supporting the extremists and terrorists in the region and around the world, or the challenges posed by the terrorist organization. We in Saudi Arabia are at the front line in facing these challenges. Once they put their hands on Saudi Arabia, they will get access to the entire Islamic world. That's why we are the primary target. That's why we suffer the most. That's why we need to work and cooperate with our allies. On top of the list comes the United States.
Mainly those extremist, Islamist, Wahhabi groups that's been fighting the rest of the society. But because of the influence of the Wahhabi ideology that doesn't accept any other one.
There's great unanimity around the effort to defeat ISIS, not just on the battlefield, but also off the battlefield and around the world. So yes, I would say there's great unanimity.
Mainly those extremist, Islamist, Wahhabi groups that's been fighting the rest of the society.
We are intensifying our efforts. The conference that the Secretary hosted in Washington yesterday was a huge success and reinforced the determination of the civilized world to take on this evil and to defeat it, God willing. We are always looking for ways to expand this coalition and to become more effective. Saudi Arabia was one of the founding members of the coalition to defeat ISIS in Syria, and our Air Force has flown the second largest number of sorties over Syria after the United States.
If you look back, do you think this war was avoidable?
No, because there was a bad intention regarding the different countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, France, UK and the US in order to destabilize Syria. So it wasn't about the Syrians. That doesn't mean that we don't have many flaws before the war and today as a country that allow many of those countries to mess with our country. I'm not excluding, I'm not saying it's only about them, but they were the ones who took the initiative in order to run this war, so I don't think it was avoidable. If we want to talk about the American alliance against ISIS, it was only elusive alliance because ISIS was expanding during that operation. At the same time, that operation is illegal operation because it happened without consulting with or taking the permission of the Syrian government, which is a legitimate government, and it's a breaching of our sovereignty. Third, they didn't prevent any Syrian citizen from being killed by ISIS.
You see them as political allies?
No, because they're not my allies at all. The EU is supporting the terrorists in Syria from the very beginning under different titles, moderate and so on. Actually, they were supporting al-Nusra and ISIS from the very beginning. They were extremists from the very beginning and led to the destruction of Syria and prevailing of terrorism in the region. That led to terrorist attacks in many European countries. I want to talk about the European role or the Western role because it's being led by the American. The only role is to support the terrorists till that moment. They didn't support any political process. They only talk about political process, but there's no real commitment to any political action till that moment. Israel from the other side supporting directly the terrorists, whether logistically or through direct raids on our army in the neighboring area. Let's talk about the reality, about the facts. Since the Russians started their raids against ISIS in cooperation with the Syrian army, of course, after we asked them to come and support us in our fight against the terrorists, ISIS has been shrinking. Before that, there was what they called the American alliance or the Western alliance against ISIS, which is a cosmetic alliance. ISIS was expanding. So they started talking about the Russian role in that negative way only after they started succeeding on the ground. Part of those killing was by the hand of the Europeans, not directly, but through supporting the terrorists from the very beginning and still calling them till that moment moderate. And they know that this is illusion. There are no moderate militants in Syria. All of them are extremists. And whether they are moderate or not, whenever you hold machine gun and armaments and kill people and destroy properties, you are terrorists. In your country, in my country, anywhere. Nobody can say that he's moderate killer or moderate terrorist. We don't have such a term. It's not enough to blame the others, to blame the West or the petrodollar state that support those terrorists. We all know about this. It's not about the politics, it's about the culture, it's about how some people would think. And unfortunately, this culture wasn't part of the original culture. It's something new that we've been seeing for the last few decades. Why? Because of the influence of the Wahhabi ideology. Because of the influence of the Wahhabi ideology that doesn't accept any other one. This atmosphere of rejecting the other could influence everyone in the same society. If we don't deal with it seriously, it's going to prevail, and the whole society will not accept the other part of the society. What you have is the fight between this mentality, mainly those extremist, Islamist, Wahhabi groups that's been fighting the rest of the society. But we have to deal with it seriously. It affected us, it affected the European society, and you see the result in your country now because you have the same focus, local focus, especially in France, when they isolated those people and they allowed the Wahhabi clerics to come and infiltrate their mind, and this is where you are paying the price. Let me talk about the European political position in general. Many in this region believe that the Europeans don't exist politically. They only follow the master, which is the American. So the question should be about the American, and European will follow and will implement what the American wants. They don't exist as independent states.
See them as political allies?
No, because they're not my allies at all.
Who exactly is your enemy at this point?
My enemy is terrorism. It's about terrorism and support coming from abroad to support terrorists to destabilize Syria.
But Saudi Arabia and Qatar, why are they so adamant about you resigning? And how would an unstable Middle East fit their agenda?
That the problem between Syria and many countries, whether in the Arab world or regional or in the West, and some countries they believe that they can control Syria through orders or through money or petrodollars, and this is impossible in Syria. They look to have their own, let's say, kingdom or emirat in their language, but mainly now they try to scare the people through explosion, assassination, suicide bombers, things like this, to push the people toward desperation and to accept them as a reality. So they go step by step, but their final aim is to have this, let's say, Islamic emirate in Syria where they can promote their own ideology in the rest of the world.
Are you personally satisfied with the current negotiation format or mechanism?
We didn't forge this mechanism. It was forged by de Mistura and the UN with the influence of the country that wanted to use those negotiations in order to make pressure on Syria not to reach any resolution.
The Saudi-backed High Negotiation Committee, HNC, are saying that they are counting the Trump administration to play a positive role.
Each one represents different agenda. This time there was no negotiations in Geneva. The only thing that we discussed in Geneva was the agenda, the headlines, what are we going to discuss later. That's it. But how and which way you need to have two parallel ways.
As we speak, top generals from Turkey, Russia, and the United States are meeting somewhere in Turkey to discuss tensions in northern Syria.
Yeah, if we want to link that meeting with ISIS in particular, we won't be objective because at least one party, which is Turkey, has been supporting ISIS till this moment because Erdogan, the Turkish president, is Muslim Brotherhood. He is ideologically linked and sympathetic with ISIS and with al-Nusra. And everybody knows about this in our region, and he helped them either through armament, logistically, through exporting oil. For the other party, which is the United States, at least during Obama administration, they dealt with ISIS by overlooking their smuggling the Syrian oil to Turkey. And this is how they can get money in order to recruit terrorists from around the world. While in Turkey, nothing has changed in that regard. ISIS in the north have the only one route of supply is through Turkey. And they're still alive, and they're still active, and they're still resisting different kind of raids and attacks. Because there's no link between Syria and the United States on the formal level. Even their raids against ISIS that happened without the cooperation or the consultation with the Syrian army or the Syrian government, which is illegal, as we always say. But talking about ISIS doesn't mean talking about the whole terrorism. ISIS is one of the products. Al-Nusra is another product. You have so many groups in Syria, but they're not ISIS, but they are Al-Qaeda. They have the same background of the Wahhabi extremist ideology.
And now U.S. troops are in Manbij.
Yeah.
Is the green light from your side? Did you open the door for these American troops?
No, we didn't. Any foreign troops coming to Syria without our invitation or consultation or permission, they are invaders, whether they are American, Turkish, or any other one. No, we don't. They didn't succeed anywhere they send troops. They only create mess. They are very good in creating problems and destroying, but they are very bad in finding solutions. Actually, the Western countries, especially the permanent members of the Security Council, they are trying to use the United Nations and the Security Council as a tool or mean in order to change regimes or government, to implement their agenda, not to restore stability, actually to create more instability around the world. And if they had the chance, they would change every government in the world, whether big country or small country, just when this government tried to be a little bit independent. If we want to talk about the American alliance against ISIS, it was only elusive alliance because ISIS was expanding during that operation. At the same time, that operation is illegal operation because it happened without consulting with or taking the permission of the Syrian government, which is a legitimate government, and it's a breaching of our sovereignty. Third, they didn't prevent any Syrian citizen from being killed by ISIS. So what are we grateful for? To be frank, no. Because the EU is supporting the terrorists in Syria from the very beginning under different titles, moderate and so on. Actually, they were supporting al-Nusra and ISIS from the very beginning. They were extremists from the very beginning. But in the meantime, if you ask any Syrian about the same question, they will tell you, no, we don't accept. Those countries supported the people who destroyed our country. We don't want them to be here. In this region believe that the European don't exist politically. They only follow the master, which is the American. So the question should be about the American, and European will follow and will implement what the American wants.
Get our picture taken here.
Mainly those extremist, Islamist, Wahhabi groups that's been fighting the rest of the society.